Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel for another midweek mystery video, where today we're going to talk about a case that you've probably heard of before if you're interested in true crime. I often try and avoid talking about the more popular cases on my channel, but at the same time this case, the case of Asha Degree, is still unsolved, and therefore it's important that people continue talking about her and continue talking and sharing her story. There's a very weird concept in the true crime community where people deem certain cases too well covered and then get funny when too many people talk about them. But true crime isn't purely here for your entertainment. These are real people with real stories. Someone out there has to know something about Asha's case, or someone else might have seen something, not realising at the time what they'd seen, and only would realise 20 years later, seeing a video on the internet, that what they saw might have been important. Awareness is the #1 most important thing when dealing with unsolved cases. Asha's case is still open to this day. In just 2015, the Cleveland County Sheriff Alan Norman described this as an extremely active case. And just last year, the FBI released an updated age progression photo showing what Asha may look like now. She's often referred to as Shelby's sweetheart, with the detective on the case saying, "The fact that it was a small child that left on Valentine's Day really caught everybody's heart in this community. She's been called Shelby's sweetheart because she's a child that's one of our own that's gone missing, and we want to find out what happened to her." Asha Jaquilla Degree was born on the 5th of August 1990, meaning that if she's alive today, she's 30 years old. But she disappeared from her home in Shelby, North Carolina on Valentine's Day, the 14th of February 2000, when she was just 9 years old. She was 4'6", about 60 pounds, a black female with black hair and brown eyes. She may have styled her hair in pigtails and was possibly wearing a white t-shirt, white jeans and white trainers. She was in all white, important as it means she would be more visible to passers-by while she walked through the night. Asha was the daughter of Harold and Aquila Degree. My apologies if I'm saying Aquila wrong, I think that's how it's pronounced. She was their second child with her brother O'Brien, born just a year before she was. And the family lived on Oakcrest Drive in Shelby, not far from Falston, which I often saw described as a semi-rural area. Both Harold and Aquila worked regular jobs nearby, meaning that the kids were latchkey kids, a term I'd never heard of before this. But basically the children would return to an empty house after school and let themselves in, because both their parents were working. Aquila worked at Kauai American Manufacturing and Harold worked late at PPG Industries, where he was a dock loader. Because of this, Asha and O'Brien were probably more responsible than most children their age. They would just let themselves in from school and get on with their homework whilst they waited for their mother to come home. Despite this, they were a very close-knit family, with more extended family living just down the street. The former Cleveland County Sheriff Dan Crawford said himself that the mother and father are excellent parents who expect a lot academically from their children and demand that they be home after school. And the family were also very religious, attending a service at the Macedonian Missionary Baptist Church once a week without fail. Asha really enjoyed church and she would attend a weekly Bible group as well. She was all round a very bright child, in the 4th grade at Falston Elementary, where she was described as an outstanding student with an exceptional attendance record, having only missed 1 day all year. She loved school and was particularly good at science and math, and enjoyed reading and writing. In a strange parallel with the events that were about to happen, Asha had been reading a book called The Whipping Boy by Sid Fleischman in her English class, which is a book about 2 kids running away from home, but they eventually return. Some people think this may have links with Asha's disappearance, that it may have inspired her to run away, but I'm getting slightly ahead of myself there. Asha also loved sport. She loved being active, she loved baseball, and was a star point guard on her kiddies basketball team, the Falston Bulldogs. O'Brien was on the boys basketball team himself. It seems like the children were raised fairly isolated from the outside world. Not in terms of not attending school and not having friends, etc., but Harold and Aquila were insistent about protecting their kids from outside influences. Aquila said in an interview with Jet magazine that he didn't even have a computer in the house because every time you turned on the TV there was some paedophile who had lured somebody's child away. They didn't want that to happen to their own children. so they kept them safe in this safe little bubble. Asha was a very quiet girl like her father, and she was very much a daddy's girl. She was also scared to death of dogs and timid enough that Aquila says that she never would have thought she would do something like this and just leave the house. Which I suppose brings us to the events leading up to Asha's disappearance. On Thursday, February 10th, Asha went to and from school as usual. Staff at the school have all said there were no particular problems or incidents that day that could have triggered anything in Asha. Usually Harold would work the second shift, working late into the night, but on the Thursday and Friday he was actually on first shift instead, which I assumes that he might even have been home when the children arrived home from school. Or at least he probably arrived home not long after they did. The next day, Friday 11th, was actually a day off school, as all Cleveland County schools had a 3-day weekend. That day, both Asha and O'Brien stayed with their aunt Keisha Degree at her house just down the street. In the afternoon, they both had their basketball practices and then they came straight home. Asha's basketball coach said that the practice was completely normal. Asha was her usual fun-filled self. So we move on to the Saturday, where both Asha and O'Brien had basketball matches at local Burns Middle School. It didn't go well for the girls' team. They ended up losing and Asha actually fouled out of the game. And this was the first game they'd lost all season, and Asha took it pretty hard, but soon perked up. She cried for a bit along with the rest of her team and told her mum that her leg hurt, but she soon forgot about it. She was the type of girl who might have felt solely responsible for the team losing. But throughout the boys' game, which came next, Asha joked and played with her mum and didn't really show that she was mulling on the loss. They returned home and life went on as normal. And believe it or not, the next day, Sunday 13th, would be completely normal as well. They went to church as usual, then headed to an aunt's house for lunch before heading home. Asha was happy as usual. Her grandmother gave her her annual Valentine's Day candy a day early and she was just made up with it. But this is where I get a little bit confused with the timeline. So Asha and her brother shared a bedroom and apparently they both went to bed around 8 PM that night. They would usually have a bath in the evening before bed, but that night there was actually a power cut after a car crashed into an electricity grid nearby. So Aquila decided to just get them up earlier in the morning and bathe them then instead. But what's confusing me is that pretty much every source I can find states the power went out around 9 PM, an hour after the kids had already gone to bed. So I'm not sure why or how that would have affected their bathing schedule. Maybe the electricity going out actually had nothing to do with the lack of baths, maybe the kids were just tired. And I don't think this has too much of an effect on the overall story either way, apart from the fact that Aquila intended to wake the kids up early the next day to bathe instead. I have seen differing sources saying the kids went to bed at 8 or 9 or half 9, the power went out at 7, 8 or 9. Everything seems to say something a little bit different. As I've already said, Harold usually worked the late shift, so he generally didn't return home until late into the night. Again, this timeline here is a tad confusing. There are lots of different reports as to what Harold did this night. And honestly, I was just completely lost whilst trying to put together this timeline. What made most sense to me is what I actually saw in a very extensive Reddit write-up, which of course I'll link down below. It was really handy for this. Harold's movements that night are a little bit unsubstantiated, with no news sources seeming to agree on any one timeline. Personally, I don't think what he was actually doing is all that important, but it is important in terms of knowing when Asha was last seen. What makes the most sense to me is that Harold would have finished work around 11:30 that night, as usual, if he was indeed working that day, because some sources say he wasn't even working on the Sunday. But let's say for argument's sake that he was. So he finishes work, then he pops to the shop to get some candy, probably on his way home from work. Some sources again say that he went home first and then went out again to get candy. We're not too sure. He gets home around midnight and the power comes back on shortly after that. He checks on both the kids in bed to find them both soundly sleeping. Other sources, which may have come from later interviews with Harold, says that Asha actually fell asleep on the sofa that evening, still in her clothes around 6:30 PM. When he returns home, she's still asleep, so he wakes her and tells her to go to bed, checking in on her and her brother about an hour later. But interviews with Aquila say that she actually put both kids to bed around 8 PM, as I said, so it's all very confusing. Aquila, in an interview with the Shelby Star, has said that when the heating came on and the electricity kicked back in, she actually woke up her husband to ask him to move the kerosene heater before going back to bed. Is it possible that Harold himself fell asleep after coming in from work, but then it got too hot because the heater was on, so he moved it? Then he went to check in on the kids. I personally don't get the impression that either parent are intentionally lying about their movements at night. I think the timeline here has just been pieced together by internet sleuths from tiny snippets of information across the internet, and we're just missing the story as a whole. Also, parts of this information have been said years and years after the night in question, so it's understandable, I suppose, that specific timings might have got confused. That's kind of where I stand on it anyway. I don't think it's outright lies, I think it's just confusion. I can't find any interview where they both sat there and said, like, this is exactly what happened that night. And the police don't seem to have a reason to question it, because I'm sure they've given the police their full timeline, and they probably think it makes sense, but all we know as the general public are just random snippets. Harold ended up staying up until about 2:30 AM, at which point he went in to check on the kids once again, and they were still fast asleep in their beds. It's around this same time, probably slightly after, that O'Brien would later say that he heard Asha's bed squeak. He didn't pay too much attention to it because he just assumed that she was moving around in her sleep, and notably he never mentioned hearing footsteps or a door opening. And so we jump to 5:45 AM on February 14th, Valentine's Day, and Harold and Aquila's wedding anniversary. The kids' alarm usually went off to get up for school at 6:30 AM, but Aquila woke up at 5:45 to get the bath ready for them. She starts running the water and then goes to get the kids up. O'Brien was asleep under the covers as he usually was, waking up when his mother called his name. But it was at this point that Aquila realised that Asha was not in her bed. Her first instinct, she said, was to look down by O'Brien's bed, as sometimes Asha would wake up and lie down there, but of course she wasn't there. O'Brien didn't know where she was either, so of course Aquila starts searching the house, checking the sofa, all of the downstairs, the kitchen, every single closet, the cars. She was in full panic mode, so she gets dressed and wakes up Harold to tell him that Asha is gone. Harold's first thought was that she might have gone across to her grandmother's house, who lived just across the street, but of course she wasn't there. They also tried Harold's sister, who lived just down the road, but she wasn't there either. Aquila throws on some shoes and runs outside, calling her mother, who told her to hang up immediately and call the police. So she throws a phone at Harold, and he does just that. The police arrived at the home within minutes, by 6:40 AM, and the search began. Just 2 to 3 minutes after the first officer arrived and the story was explained, the local sheriff and more officers turned up. There was no sign of forced entry into the home. Aquila provided a photo of Asha, and the sheriff called for a K9 unit to attend the scene. It was later confirmed that the dogs could not pick up Asha's scent at all, probably because of the thunderstorm that had been going on all throughout the night. This just washed any scent away. Aquila walked up and down the neighbourhood calling for her daughter, and by 7 AM everyone on the street had been woken up to the sound of her shouts, and they all joined in helping the search. By midday, over 60 people, including law enforcement, family, friends and locals, were all searching the streets. A helicopter with infrared heat detection also joined in the hunt. 5 or 6 local news channels turned up at the Degree house to report on the missing child, and soon Aquila said that she was plastered all over the TV. Every local person knew of the fact that Asha was missing. Her photo was circulated everywhere. Which is when the first lead in this case came in from a trucker called Jeff Ruppy. At around 4 AM, he was driving down Highway 18 and reports seeing a child, who is believed to be Asha, walking south down the side of the highway. He described this girl as wearing a white dress, white trainers and no coat, hair in pigtails, walking with her head down in the storm. Jeff was a father himself, so the sight of this girl walking alone at 4 AM bothered him. He waited until he could turn around, driving back towards her on the opposite side of the highway, and then turned around again, intending to speak to her to see if she was okay. But when he rolled down the window, the child ran off into the woodland off the side of the road, and he didn't see her again. Another trucker also reported seeing Asha on the side of the road. Roy Blanton was driving with his son, Roy Jr., and they reported seeing her around 4:30 AM, also describing a child in white clothing. He even got on his CB radio and warned other truckers in the area to watch out for a young woman walking on the road. He contacted the authorities the day after telling his wife the story, who had seen about Asha's disappearance on the news. neither trucker nor any other driver on the road contacted the police about a young girl walking alone along the side of the highway at 4 a.m. But then again, neither had mobile phones, which probably made it a bit difficult, and they probably figured there'd be no point by the time they got home. I wish they had, but hindsight is 2020. These were the last confirmed sightings of Asha. The police believe this girl on the side of the highway was definitely her. She likely would have been very familiar with the route she was walking, as it was the way her school bus went. As I previously mentioned, just as matches with the trucker's descriptions, Asha left the home wearing white trainers and white jeans. She would also have been carrying a black book bag and likely a kiddie's handbag with Tweety Bird on it, that she bought with tokens from school just the week beforehand. Other clothing her family reported as missing from her room a couple of days later included her favourite blue jeans with a red stripe, a long-sleeved white nylon t-shirt, a red vest trimmed in black, black overalls with Tweety Bird on them, and a black and white long-sleeved shirt. It seems to me that Asha packed 2 full outfits to go with her wherever she was going, but as Cleveland County Sheriff's Office Detective Tim Adams has said, the contents, from what we can tell, look like something a child would pack rather than her parents preparing her for an overnight stay. It was February and she didn't even have any warm clothes with her. I don't personally know how cold it gets in North Carolina in February, but an adult would probably pack something more than a single long sleeve shirt. Once the sightings of Asha along Highway 18 were made public, volunteers and trained searchers searched the immediate area to no avail. People living in the area were also asked to search their properties for any clue. Maybe she'd got cold and tired and had hidden away somewhere to keep her warm and to sleep. No one found Asha, of course, but in the shed of one local business called Turner Upholstery, they found candy wrappers, a pencil and marker, and a hair bow, all later confirmed to belong to Asha. She'd clearly attempted shelter from the storm at some point in the night. But this wasn't the lead they originally expected it to be. Also in the shed, they found a wallet-sized photo of a young girl. Whilst the photo is of a young black girl, it is not a photo of Asha, and none of her family recognised the girl in the photo, nor did officials at Asha's school. The police released this photo to the public, hoping that somebody would recognise her, but nothing ever came of this. From then on, there would be essentially nothing more in Asha's case for a year, despite relentless searching and the FBI and North Carolina State Bureau investigation getting involved pretty quickly. There was no sign of a crime scene at the Degree House, no signs of any disturbance whatsoever, and it was publicly announced that her parents were not considered to be suspects in Asha's disappearance. And there was no sign of a struggle, blood, or a car accident along the highway either. She had just got up in the middle of the night, walked out of one of the 2 doors of her house, headed to the highway, and disappeared. Over the coming months, the Degree family do everything they can to locate Asha. They distributed flyers, they went on a show called the Montel Williams Show exactly 1 month later on March 14th. Then Asha's story was featured on America's Most Wanted. Oprah showed her picture on her show. But of course, nothing ever came of this. The police stopped the search for Asha after her disappearance. They didn't close the investigation, but they stopped the active manhunt eventually, knowing that they would no longer be looking for her alive in the woods. They would be just looking for a dead body. In that first week of the investigation, over 300 leads were submitted, none of which led to anything substantial. County Sheriff Dan Crawford urged the media to keep Asha's story alive, to not stop talking about her. The best chance they had, they said, was someone coming forward with another sighting or a potential suspicion about someone being involved. I suppose even now, almost 21 years on, people have fulfilled this wish. People are still talking about Asha. The year before her disappearance in 1999, 6,391 children were reported as missing in North Carolina. Most ended up being runaways, and not a single one was abducted by a stranger, according to information from the North Carolina Center for Missing Persons. Every single child was found, which is what makes Asha's case so much stranger. The police have settled on the assumption that Asha left the house of her own accord. No one broke in, she wasn't abducted from her house. She had time to take her things, and she was alone when she was walking down the highway. You could easily think that she just went on an adventure, possibly copying the protagonist of the book that she was reading at school, even though that was totally out of character for her. Maybe she got injured, maybe she fell, maybe she succumbed to the cold February weather and it just so happens that her little body got hidden and never found. You would be forgiven for thinking that, if it were not for the thing that was found the very next year. On the 3rd of August 2001, about 30 miles north of where Asha was last seen in neighbouring Burke County, construction workers were digging an access road for a new house. These construction workers found Asha's book bag, the one that she'd taken with her that night, buried and double wrapped in plastic bags. The worker who found it later said that the book bag contained Asha's name and phone number. The bag was sent to the FBI lab in Quantico, Virginia for analysis, but the results, if there were any, have never been made public. But in 2018, it was confirmed that the book bag contained a concert t-shirt for New Kids on the Block and the children's book McElligot's Pool by Dr. Seuss. I think they both belong to Asha, but I found no confirmation of that anywhere. They released images of both things, hoping to jog someone's memory. If there were more things in the bag, they haven't released details. Again, if the bag had been found alone, you could potentially think that Asha had just dropped it, but it was wrapped in 2 plastic bags, double layered and buried. Someone had purposefully wrapped up and buried it, hoping it would never be found. This wasn't like the hair bow and the candy wrappers that could have just been dropped by her. It's highly unlikely that Asha would have made it almost 30 miles from home and buried her own book bag. Whilst this lead didn't actually lead anywhere, it did take the investigation in a slightly new direction. Whatever had happened to Asha, whether she'd left the house of her own accord or at the behest of another adult who was probably known to her because her parents insist that Asha was shy and wouldn't have communicated with an adult she didn't know, she had at some point come across an adult and come to some kind of harm. Asha's book bag didn't end up where it did by chance. And a few years later, a man in prison gave the authorities a tip-off that led to an excavation not far from where the book bag had been found. They found animal bones and a pair of men's khaki trousers, but nothing else of note. Over the past 20 years, that stretch of Highway 18 that Asha was last seen on has been examined and re-examined more times than they can count. In 2017, the FBI got their Child Abduction Rapid Deployment Team to come down to examine the area. Dozens of expert eyes conducting 300 interviews in just 2 weeks. This was 17 years later and Cleveland County was still trying to look at ways to get fresh leads here. I feel like a lot of the time with missing persons cases, the local police departments are often criticised, and often for good reason. But it's very refreshing when you come across a case where it's obvious the police have made a significant effort. Asha's case has never been left on the shelf to collect dust. And the tips have steadily come in over the years. In 2014, Cleveland County Sheriff's Office Detective Tim Adams came out of retirement specifically to lead a new department probe into Asha's case. The year after this, they teamed up with the FBI and the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation to conduct a complete top-to-bottom re-examination of this case. This alone generated more than 350 new leads. The only lead they've released information on is that Asha was potentially seen getting into a dark green 1970s model Lincoln Continental Mark IV, or a Ford Thunderbird with rust around the wheel wells. They released this potential lead in 2016 and have released images of these vehicle models. The Sheriff Alan Norman commented, "This vehicle is right now considered a vehicle of interest and it was occupied 2 times on the day of her disappearance. It had been discovered by legwork by the Sheriff's Office investigators along with the federal government. As far as I can tell, they're still open to people contacting them with information about this specific car." There have been other potential leads over the years, potential people of interest. Just a few months after Asha disappeared, an inmate at the local jail and an ex-schoolmate of Aquila contacted the sheriff's office. He said that on the night Asha disappeared, him and a friend were driving back to Shelby late at night and they hit Asha with their car. They put her body in the back of the truck and later dumped her body in nearby Moss Lake. Neither the Degrees nor law enforcement believed this though, thinking that he was just trying to get a plea deal on the federal charges that he was facing already. Nevertheless, they dragged the lake a couple of times and had it searched by divers, but they came up with nothing. There was just no evidence of this at all, including the fact that investigators found no evidence of a hit and run on the road, which they did originally think could be a possible theory. You would expect to see tyre marks though, other witnesses, blood marks, damage. There was just nothing, and therefore any theory of a hit and run has been pretty much dismissed. And then in 2014, a 52-year-old man called Donald Preston Ferguson was arrested for the murder of a 7-year-old girl called Shalonda Paul in 1990. She had been sexually assaulted and strangled before a body was found dumped behind Jones Elementary School in Greensboro, North Carolina, just the day after she went missing. Shalonda, like Asha, was a small black girl who was reported as missing from her family home. Ferguson was linked to her disappearance after nearly 24 years by forensic technology. You can see why there have been connections made between him and Asha's case, and Greensboro and Shelby are only about 2 hours apart, which in the UK is way too far apart for two cases like this to be considered connected, but incredibly close in USA distance. This connection has been looked into, has been investigated, but there have never been any links found. That's pretty much everything the public know up to now about Asha's disappearance. It seems that the general consensus amongst investigators is that Asha left her house by her own accord. Perhaps she was more upset than people realised about the basketball match and couldn't sleep. Perhaps she decided to take a leaf out of the book she was reading at school and go on an adventure. Maybe she was even sleepwalking, although as far as I can tell that's not something she'd ever done before. The strangest thing about all of this is that Asha clearly pre-planned it. It wasn't just a case of her waking up and deciding to go for a walk. She packed a bag, she took clothes and candy with her. O'Brien doesn't remember her walking around the room and packing things in the middle of the night, something he probably would have woken up to. So whatever she packed, she probably did it the night before. Was she planning on going for just a few days? Whilst her parents and the police don't think that Asha left the house because someone made her, it does seem like a reasonable explanation. But who would it have been, and how would she have been in contact with this adult that persuaded her to leave her house in the middle of the night? Like I said, the family didn't have access to a computer or the internet, so she wasn't being groomed in that way, and as Aquila says, she was a very shy child. She wouldn't have gone off with somebody she didn't know. But I suppose that speculation is irrelevant if the police are so convinced she left on her own. Perhaps she did just get lost in the woods, perhaps she was just never found. But that still doesn't explain why her book bag was found where it was, wrapped in 2 plastic bags. I know some people think that Aquila and Harold are suspicious in this case, but all you can do is trust the judgment of the authorities, who I'm sure know a lot more than the general public. I mean, we're not talking about just local dodgy sheriff's departments here, we're talking FBI level. A lot of people online seem to suspect them of something because their stories seem to be confused about what exactly happened that night. But as I said earlier in the video, trauma and time can confuse memories, and we only know bits and pieces, snippets of speech said to the media. So if the police and the FBI don't have reason to suspect them after what I'm sure has been very intense questioning and investigation, then I don't see why there's any point in me speculating on that and why the public should speculate about that. Plus, I see zero reason as to why they would want to bury Asha's book bag if it was them. It's completely unnecessary if she'd come to harm in her own home, and also she was seen walking along the highway alone by 2 separate people. Her parents weren't with her when she was walking alone, and the chance of it being a separate child walking down the highway alone at 4 AM is slim. From where I'm sitting, I think their stories completely hold up, and the intensity with which they spent the last 20 years searching for their daughter is admirable. I don't think they'd put in so much effort as they have. Their entire lives revolve around searching for their daughter if they'd done it. Of course, everyone's welcome to their own opinions on that, but I just thought it's worth saying that I don't particularly see it. Personally, I think Asha was just unlucky. If I had to take my guess, I would say that she left the house of her own accord to go on an adventure. I probably would have eventually been found wandering the woods if it wasn't for coming across just one bad person. Maybe it just so happened that that night someone was driving around looking for opportunity and they came across Asha, perhaps after she'd sheltered in the shed for a little bit. This person then attempted to dispose of her book bag and then perhaps dispose of Asha's body in a similar way, and one day somebody will just stumble across her. Although saying that, her mother refuses to believe that she's dead, which could very well be the case. Perhaps she was trafficked, which I don't ever think is much better than death, if I'm being honest. She believes that Asha is still alive, saying to WBTV a few years ago, "I don't believe she's dead. I've never believed it from day one. If it's not 99.9%, I'm not going to believe it. Every year in February, close to the anniversary of Asha's disappearance, the Degree family hold a walk from their house on Oakcrest Drive, where they still live to this day, to a sign about Asha's disappearance sits on Highway 18, close to where she was last seen. Family members and supporters make the walk to remember Asha and to remind people that the search is still ongoing. And nobody is willing to give up on Asha. I think everyone involved in her case needs closure for this. The FBI have said, "We encourage anybody out there that if they have any information, no matter how small or minor it may seem, it might be extremely crucial to further us getting one step closer to Asha. We will continue to pursue all avenues to find out what circumstances led to her disappearance, and we will continue to pursue this case at all costs." The FBI, along with the National Centre for Missing and Exploited Children, have released multiple age-progressed photos of Asha showing her as a 29-year-old. The FBI is also offering a $25,000 reward for any information leading to the arrest and conviction of the person or persons responsible for Asha's disappearance, on top of a $20,000 reward set aside by the Cleveland County Sheriff's Office and the community. That's $45,000 in total. Clearly the authorities intend to get this case solved, and it really is just about that one person coming forward with that one piece of information. Like the FBI said, it doesn't matter how small this information is, it could lead to huge leaps in Asha's case. There's just a puzzle piece missing. There's not much more investigators can do at this point without helpful tips from the public. I get the impression that they're willing to pursue pretty much anything at this point. And her parents are still hoping she just walks in through the door one day. Law enforcement are still treating this case as if it just happened yesterday, so if you or anyone you know lives around this area in North Carolina, then share this video or just share the FBI page. All of my sources will be linked in the description box as per. And it's just one small thing that's needed, just one tiny thing could blow this case wide open. It breaks my heart that she's been missing for 20 years now. Why did she leave her house? What happened to her? There's not a single answer. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you have any other cases you'd like me to cover of your loved ones or just cases you know well, then please put in the comments down below, or you can email me. My email is always in the description box as well. I will see you in the next one. Bye guys.